Yo, what is going on, guys? My name is Hart for those of you that are new. And today I'll be breaking down the Thanksgiving Day slate, NFL slate here on DraftKings. $1 million up top to first place. Can't wait. One of the best NFL slates of the year. Going to be super fun watching all three of these games. So I'll be breaking down this slate, going over, who I like, game by game breakdown, my favorite plays, how to get different to try to win this $1 million to first and set you guys up for one of the best Thanksgivings ever with that $1 million in your back pocket. As always, make sure to tip me if you guys win. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, let's try to get this $1 million first. I mean, I hope you guys have a great Thanksgiving. Hope you guys enjoy a lot of football, eat a lot of food. This will be uploaded Wednesday, probably midday to early afternoon. So hope you guys have a great Thanksgiving tomorrow. But let's dive right into this here. I want to take a quick look at the spread and game total. So Packers Lions right now, 7.5 point spread, 47 game total. Commanders Dallas Cowboys, 11 point spread. Obviously some blowout risk there. 49 game total saw the highest of the three so far. So a lot of points expected to be scored there. And then 49ers Seahawks to close out the night, 7 point spread, 43 game total. So diving into the slate here, let's start with the quarterbacks. At the top, we have Dak Prescott, 6.8K. I would assume he's going to be probably the chalkiest quarterback play of the slates. I do think it's pretty interesting. It really depends on like what happens with Geno Smith, because if Geno Smith's out, it will open up, pretty I think solid contrarian option there, and Drew Lock at 5,000. But otherwise, I do think most people will flock to Dak Prescott here, as well as Brock Purdy there. I do think they'll probably be the two highest owned players just because Dak has, the game total is 49. He's been really good recently. It does have a lot of targets and, a lot of options to throw to. Same thing with Brock Purdy. He's just in a fantastic system and offense there. As you can see, perfect passer rating, threw for three touchdowns, excuse me, and has, pretty solid upside there. And he's been very cheap, 6.1K, and just has a lot of people you can stack him with. So I do think those two will be the most popular. And then I think, Goff and Howell will be close thirds there, just because Goff obviously has some good options to throw it to, even though the running game's pretty strong right now. And Howell is just, dropping back a ton, as I mentioned in my Sunday slate breakdown. As you can see, he's averaging 45 or more passing attempts like the past 5, 6 games in a row. So once again, going to be sacked a ton there by Dallas, but they're going to have to throw the ball a ton. So he's an interesting play. And I do think the more contrarian plays would be, Geno Smith if he does play. But, him, Love, and then, whether Geno's in or out's a lock. If he does, if Geno's out, then it's going to be, Love and Lock are going to be more so the contrarian cheaper options. Jordan Love would be interesting, but they did probably lose Aaron Jones for this game, which does really affect this team here. They should be more reliant on the passing game, which obviously makes Love a little bit more viable. But at the same time, they've really struggled without Aaron Jones in that offense there. We're able to somehow pull it off that win against the Chargers, which they probably did not deserve to win. But yeah, Love would probably be the riskiest, but does have some options to throw to. And then Lock, 5,000 here. If he does play, I probably will throw him in a lineup just because, he's a starting, I don't know if starting, I should say starting caliber kind of QB, but he did start for a few seasons in the Denver Broncos organization. So it's not like he's just one of these random guys off the street. Like he does still have some talent in him. So I don't think it's like a huge hit to the offense. I do think he's slightly more aggressive and riskier when it comes to throwing the ball, which obviously could lead to more turnovers, but also could lead to more looks for the wide receivers in a tough matchup here against the 49ers. So do have some interest in Drew Lock there down at 5,000. So right now, obviously, I'm kind of waiting for that Geno Smith news, but I'd say right now I'm kind of leaning towards either Dak or Brock Purdy there. As much as I hate going to Brock Purdy there, I'm kind of leaning that route, but I also don't mind going to Goff. But yeah, I just don't feel great about the two running backs that they have there. I'd rather go to obviously the running backs. That's going to be the more popular route to go to the running backs rather than going to Goff. So that leads to another path for you guys to get contrarian is to go to Goff in that passing game rather than the running backs. But right now, I will just throw in Dak for the situation that we're in. For the running back situation, obviously we have CMC at the top. Going to be super hard to fade him, even on this 3-game slate with a good amount of options here at the running back position. We do have a good amount of options, so I will say that. So it'll be interesting to fade him. So like for example, Gibbs and Montgomery, they're going to split the backfield, but they're pretty cheap here. Pollard going to be kind of that contrarian option there. He actually had finally a solid game there, involved in the passing game, involved in the run game. So once again, I think he makes a very strong contrarian option. Kenneth Walker is looking like he will miss, which opens up Zach Charbonnet, who is going to be a workhorse here. He's only 5.3K. Doesn't matter if they're going to be up or down. They will use him a ton. As you can see, he's involved in the passing game and the running game. So, I mean, it could be one of those situations where, Kenneth Walker gets ruled out. People are going to load up on, Zach Charbonnet. If Aaron Jones is doubtful, if he doesn't play, AJ Dillon might be out. It should be good to go. But if he's out, then it's like they're going to be very cheap options for Green Bay, which you wouldn't feel great going into them, but they'd be the flat minimum price tag. But yeah, if AJ Dillon does play, could open up a situation where you maybe get to him, even though he's been super efficient. But he did have a workhorse load with Aaron Jones that last game. Been efficient all season when we saw those games, but he should see around 15 attempts. All it takes is them getting to the goal line, throwing it in with him maybe catching a pass or two, which he saw 4 last week. So it's like he can easily go for 10 plus there. And obviously, if you throw in a touchdown, he could be optimal as gross as it sounds. So it could lead to us getting into both those running backs and then possibly even get into like a third running back here, like one of the Detroit ones where it's like it doesn't feel great fading CMC. You'd probably want to load up on like a pass catcher or two there for the 49ers. But yeah, I mean, it could lead to a situation where you get weird fade CMC to win that $1 million at first. So that's kind of my thoughts there. But overall, for the running back, CMC looks fantastic. Obviously, very, very safe spend up. Solid about 21 rushing attempts. He's going to see probably 5 plus targets out of the backfield. He's averaged at least 3 in every single game or more. I mean, we kind of know what we're getting from CMC. Fantastic matchup here versus Seattle. So right now, I think I'm going to go to him. Gibbs and Montgomery. I think I give the smallest edge to probably Montgomery. I was going to say Gibbs, but I say Montgomery just for the fact that they do tend to go to him more often than not when it comes to the red zone. Like they will sub him in just because he's got more size compared to Gibbs. Pause. But yeah, they just like running Montgomery when they're close to the red zone. So that gives them obviously more touchdown upside, 6.3K. Gibbs obviously does have the passing, upside. So if they are down for some reason, we'll lean on him in terms of the passing upside. As you can see, 6 targets, 59 yards. So it's just one of those things. It really kind of comes down to ownership. I do think you can play both. That'd be another route for you guys to get contrarian for the slates is to play both running backs. I don't mind that just because they're going to split the backfield, split the carries, and they're both really, really solid running backs. So I think right now just the slightest of edges to Montgomery just because that touchdown upside, but Gibbs almost, kind of makes up for it with that passing upside. So I think they're both very strong plays there. Obviously, the Lions rely heavily on that run game, and they're really good at it because of their offensive line. Totally powered here, as I said, going to be a very contrarian option here at 6.7K, sandwiched in between both Detroit Lions running backs. But once again, really like him. I do think that touchdown kind of woke him up in that last game against Carolina. So we know the upside there with Tony. He's a really good running back, just really hasn't shown it this year. So it's just one of those things. You can't doubt him just because of what he's done so far this season, especially in a 3-game slate here, $1 million up top to first place. You can't let that cloud your judgment of wanting to play him. Kenneth Walker's questionable. Obviously, if he's good to go, there'd still be that, is he going to be on a snap count? We'll have to see. Obviously, wait for that news. We know it. But with him, most likely, I'd say doubtful. Zach Charbonnet is going to be a very strong play there at 5.3K that I already mentioned. It doesn't matter kind of the game script. He will be used heavily. And then in terms of value there for Seattle, if there is no Kenneth Walker and Zach does start, they will go to, let me pull him up here real fast. They will go to DJ Dallas, who's more so kind of just one of those pass catchers out of the backfield. Could see a couple targets, could maybe break off a big one or two. So if you were feeling frisky, you can definitely get to him there. Brian Robinson, another one of those running backs, kind of like a Charbonnet, where he will see a good amount of the workload. Now, the big news here for this situation with the Commanders is that Gibson is questionable, and he missed that last game. And with him missing that last game, Brian Robinson pretty much played every single snap and was heavily involved in that passing game there. So it didn't matter if that they were down to the Giants. He was just heavily utilized, which in most cases, if they're down in games, Gibson is that pass catching back. As you can see, he's pretty much averaged 5 targets in games that they're down. So he's heavily utilized out of the backfield to catch balls and passes. Doesn't really see a ton of running attempts right now. So that's the big news there, because in a game which the Commanders are heavy dogs, 11-point dogs, high game total. If they're going to be down the whole game, it's going to make sense to get to Gibson there at 4.5K if he does play, just because they're going to use him a ton there out of the backfield to catch passes. So that could lead to another running back option there that kind of cloudies and muddies up the running back range, where I think that's the key, is kind of nailing the running backs this slate, just because there's a ton of good options, ton of different routes we can go to. So not, once again, we have to wait for that news there, but that is very interesting news when it comes to the running back situation, and it could lead to a situation where these games are pretty spread out, about 3-4 hours between each one of them. So we might have to get that news where we build around the fact that we don't know if Gibson's going to play at all, and if he does, then it helps you out, and if not, it's going to screw you depending on how you build your lineup. So could lead to situations like that, which makes it a very interesting Millie Maker slates because that's huge news there, as well as the Kenneth Walker news, which is obviously that last game there. So a lot to hopefully get before the first game starts. In terms of the onion running backs, mentioned AJ Dillon, probably going to be the starter. He's questionable, limited in practice, but he should probably be good to go. Probably we'll see 15 attempts. We'll see some passes out of the, catches out, passing attempts out of the backfield for him to catch there. 5.4K is a strong play. Even so, even with him being efficient. But otherwise, there for the running back situation, not much else to touch on. Mitchell is kind of that secondary back to CMC, but don't think you really need to get weird with the backups unless we kind of get that news for Kenneth Walker and Gibson. Moving on to the wide receiver range here. I think there's some interesting plays here. So obviously, CD Lamb and St. Brown are going to be the two best options. Just the upside and the floor they both have right now is insane. So obviously with Dak, going to throw CD in there, but love St. Brown as well. And especially if you're not going to get to one of the running backs for the Lions, it makes sense to get to St. Brown because of how heavily involved he is in that offense. Ayuk 7K. He's had a really strong season. Not seeing a ton of targets, but he's still getting there because he's breaking off some big plays. I think he's a solid option, but I'd still rather get to Debo Samuel at 5.9K. Not seeing as many targets, but he will get involved in the running game. They'll run end arounds, they'll run trick plays. I do think his workload will start picking up more after a strong start to the season. Really cooled off, got some injuries, and it's kind of been the Ayuk show, but I do think they'll get Debo heavily involved here against Seattle. So really, really like Debo there at 5.9K. But I have a good amount of interest in Tyler and DK. If there's Geno Smith, I do think it makes kind of safe options in terms if you land on them, you feel fine. But if Lock is in, then it makes some riskier plays. But I think it comes down to ownership for me. But it would make them risky, but I do think it would make them worth the reward because I don't think many people will go to them. And they're both pretty cheap, and they both have huge upside there. I give the slight edge to DK. I do think Lock would probably favor DK a little bit more, but yeah, I think they're both strong options there. If there's Geno, and I think they'd probably still be strong options for me personally if there's no Geno, just because of that risk reward situation with going to Drew Lock and him probably relying on his receivers, his two trusty receivers there. Mentioned Debo, really like him. Terry McLaurin, Romeo Dobbs. We get in this range here where like this 5.4K to about 4.1K here with JSN. It's a very interesting range. And why I say that is because, for Washington here, we'll go to them quickly. Howell is dropping back a ton. So McLaurin, Dotson, Samuel going to be the three main wide receivers there for Howell. And it's like he's kind of spreads the ball out to all of his guys. So the backfield, the two running backs, all three receivers, and the tight end. So it's like no one really sticks out too much, and that's why they're all kind of priced about right. I think I'd feel the safest with Terry McLaurin just because he's the most experienced, probably the best wide receiver they have. But a guy like Curtis Samuel is good value. As you can see, he's getting peppered with targets. Hasn't been the best recently in terms of those targets, but still, if he's going to see 4+ targets at 3.6K, that's a strong value. Dotson 4.6, he's been pretty solid. He's been up and down in terms of his targets, but he definitely has that upside. I don't think we need to get to any of these value guys there. They did play a little bit more just because Curtis Samuel got ejected, but it's going to be pretty much these three wide receivers, and that's it. Don't think you need to get super, super risky and go down to like a Brown or Pringle. But for the tight end situation here, I'll just quickly go over it for Washington because we're already on them. Logan Thomas, another one of those guys, heavily involved in the passing game, seen a good amount of targets as you can see here. More short range stuff, nothing too crazy long, but obviously a very tall player, so he's a huge red zone threat. So lots like there for him at 3.5K. But back to this wide receiver range, we get to the Green Bay Packers wide receivers, which Dobbs, Watson, Reed. That's the big question mark there. Is Reed, will he play? He has a chest injury. Do you think he also had a little bit of I thought he had a little bit, yeah, of a concussion, or excuse me, that's Wicks. So Reed had a chest injury, but he should be good to go. And Wicks had a concussion injury, knee injury, didn't play, or excuse me, didn't practice. So with him out, obviously the three main wide receivers will be Dobbs, Watson, and Reed. But then they could mix in a fourth guy, which would probably be Heath there and Torrey a little bit, which could open up some GPP dart throw Hail Mary plays if you want to get to Heath and Torrey. But I'd still feel better. You'll get into Reed, who's seen more action here, seen some end arounds, kind of more of the so that boomer bust guy there. Watson also boomer bust, but it seems like he's finally starting to get on the same page as Love a little bit. And then Dobbs is probably the safest option here for Green Bay. I mean, but they're all going to see anywhere from like 4 to 8 targets. So it's one of those things. I say Dobbs is probably the safest, then Watson, and then Reed. But we could also get to Heath and Torrey, who could see that fourth wide receiver run there, depending on that Wicks news. Moving on down here a little bit more. We have Cooks there for Dallas, just more so of a contrarian option there if you're going to play Dak. Don't love him there, but does have some decent upside. JSN 4.1K. He's been coming on strong here recently. As you can see, 4, 7, 5, and 6. 12, 16, 12, 12, 9, 7. So he's been strong at 4.1. So I do think that makes for an interesting play there. If there is Geno Smith, obviously, if there's Drew Lock, it makes Jason more kind of contrarian there. Don't love him as much. I'd rather get to kind of the two main wide receivers for them. Gallup, another interesting GPP option there for Dak. Alongside Brandon Cooks. I'd still rather get to CD or one of the tight ends. And then I will get to the Detroit guys. So Reynolds and Khalif have not been involved heavily recently, just because it kind of seems like Jamison Williams is slowly starting to get more run here. Obviously, the boomer bust guy here doesn't see a ton of targets, but he's the big playability. So if he can catch one of those balls, which he's seen a lot recently, I know it's not showing up here in the box score, but he's had a lot where it's like he probably should have caught that, and that could have been like a 40-yard catch, 50-yard catch. One of them was even for like a 40-yard touchdown. So his box score could look extremely different here. He's the boomer bust play. If you're looking for the best boomer bust play on the board, it is probably Jamison Williams down there at 3.4K that has the big playability. He gets like 1 or 2 looks a game there for that. So all it takes is him catching one, and it can change the whole slate there. So that's my favorite boomer bust play. Moving on to the tight end situation here. Don't love the price tag for Kittle. I know he's been more involved recently, had some huge games here, but one of them was out with CMC. The other was without Debo, I believe. So it's like the guys have been missing where Kittle has stepped up. So with him back, he's kind of been the like third/fourth option, hasn't been involved too heavily. But that last game, it was kind of different. Like he saw 9 targets, caught 8 for 89 and touchdown. So I think it's a fine play. I just still don't love it. I do think he can kind of get lost in the mix behind CMC, Debo, and Ayuk. And it's one of those things like if you're not going to play CMC, I think you'd want to get to Kittle and either Debo and Ayuk. Otherwise, if you're going to play CMC, I do think it's easier to get to a guy like Debo or Ayuk and not get to Kittle. Laporta's there. I saw some stats that he's not the best when both running backs play. His targets kind of go down a little bit. We saw that last game. He did not catch a ball until like the last 4 minutes of the game there. Only had 5 targets. So he's going to be more so kind of like that 5 to 10 yard range guy. So I think it's a fine play. I don't love it. I'd rather get to Ferguson here, who's still seen a decent amount of targets from Dak. Hasn't had a huge explosion game there until week 9. But 4 catches for 26 yards and a touchdown there. He's a red zone threat. I do have a good amount of interest in him there as a stack with Dak there. Cheap option. Same with Logan Thomas. I think if you want to be super contrarian here on the slate today, double tight end is the way you want to go. And I do think they have enough upside to get you there with Ferguson and Thomas compared to the running backs there. So that's another interesting route to go. Musgrave, it looks like he might not be playing here. They're kind of serious situation, kind of serious injury there with his stomach or chest. So with him out, could be Kraft who gets some run here, which could be an interesting value play there at 2.5K because DeQuara is questionable. I think DeQuara is good to go. They'd both be fine plays, but no real standouts. And then in terms of the tight end situation there for Seattle, Font is going to be the best one if you want to get to them. I don't think I'm going to get to any of these Seattle tight ends just because they're very, very seldom used. So if you wanted to get super, super contrarian, that's another option for you to go to is those Seattle tight ends. But I will also mention Bates and Turner for Washington. They are running some decent routes here as the backup tight ends, getting a few targets as well. So I'll mention them. I'd still rather get to obviously Logan Thomas, but they are down there. And then for the defenses, to kind of wrap up this video, um, obviously the Cowboys defense is the best right now. Howell has just been getting absolutely torched, getting sacked like 5+ times a game. So they look at the best and clear best defense. But obviously, if there is no Geno Smith, that does open up the 49ers as being like tied with the Cowboys for best defense. So it really comes down to ownership there if you want to go to the chalky defenses and great matchups. Um, I think the Lions are kind of the sneaky ones there. Green Bay does give up the ball a decent amount. Not having Aaron Jones has really hurt their offense. So that could be an interesting spot there, 3.2. Packers, they have a good defense. It's just one of those things, as we saw last week, Jared Goff is turnover prone. So it could happen. You don't feel great about it just because, they're usually out there so long. His offense has been brutal. That's, they kind of wear down and kind of break down. Seahawks there, don't love it. I think they're probably the worst defense I'd get to. And then I do think the Commanders are interesting, punt play just because defense is not the best. They're not the worst. They're just kind of there. They have some upside. And Dak at times can throw random interceptions and look bad to the point where it's like it could bring the defense into play. So I think the Lions are probably the favorite right now for me, depending on the Geno Smith news there. But yeah, I think you can kind of go any route. I'd probably stay away from the Seahawks, but obviously on a 3-game slate, every defense is viable. It's a very high variance position here on a 3-game slate. So that's my thoughts there for this slate. Obviously, this is kind of the start of the build I'm looking to get to. Obviously, there's some big news there with Geno Smith. The running back situation here really, really defines the whole slate. So I think that's the big question mark on the slate is, can you pick the right running backs? There's a lot of different options we can go to, a lot of similar plays there depending on the news. So hit that like button, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.